Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. If you guys are new around here, my name is Divyanka and I'm a doctor of pharmacy here in the US. On this channel, I strive to provide resources for both you and I to help us live our best and most productive life. Today's video is actually a presentation. I was invited to the National SNPhA organization. They've been doing a webinar series to highlight different career topics over the span of a couple of weeks, and I am so happy and honored to be invited to speak in one of the webinars. A lot of students still don't understand the value of a PharmD within industry, what that can really mean for you and your career, and kind of everything in between. So in this presentation, I go over kind of my route to where I am, what steps I took within my career, how it all kind of adds up to my story, and other topics like what is medical writing, the value of a PharmD within industry, etc. Thank you so much to SNPhA and Taylor for inviting me and having me for this webinar. I really enjoyed speaking to all the students, and the audience was super involved in asking questions. So thank you guys so much for being involved, for having me, and for giving me a space to give this presentation. As always, for this channel, I want to be as helpful as possible. So I've gone ahead and of course provided you guys with the recording of that exact presentation. So without further ado, let's just play that presentation so you guys can get learning.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your evening to come and really hear this amazing speaker talk tonight. And so I just want to introduce you to the ACE series. And just for your clarification, ACE stands for Advancing Career Excellence. And so we have an amazing speaker for you tonight. This is primarily about kind of finding your next steps in terms of finding an industry position and kind of learning a little bit more about entry positions within the pharmaceutical industry. And so I am Taylor McClelland, your National Corresponding Secretary, and we have a wonderful speaker for you tonight. You can see her lovely face there. This is Dr. Divyanka Gupta. She is actually an alumni of the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, MCPHS, and she is actually pursuing her MBA in healthcare management as well. In addition to that, she has also founded the podcast FocusRx, and you'll see her lovely logo in the corner there. And so I want you all to give a very warm welcome to this amazing speaker who is going to bless us with her knowledge tonight. So thank you all so much for coming, and I will pass it on to her.
Thank you so much, Taylor. You are too nice. You did not need to say all of that, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and reaching out. I think this series in general is awesome. It's an awesome initiative, and more of this kind of needs to happen within pharmacy. So I'm happy to be a part of it as much as I can. So thank you guys for being here today. Like Taylor mentioned, my name is Divyanka, and today I'm going to be talking to you about finding your voice in pharma with kind of a unique twist, and I'm going to show you that through my own story. Oh, if it'll actually go forward. I just have to put this in here. All these thoughts are my own thoughts. I'm not affiliated. I'm not affiliated with any company that is bestowing these thoughts on me. So today I want to just go over a few key points, and I'm going to cover a lot of material kind of high level. And I'm going to try to save time at the end, of course, for questions. And because it's going to be so high level, I'm sure there will be questions, but just bear with me and we'll definitely get through it, hopefully in due time. So I first want to highlight who I am. And before I do that, I actually want you guys to step back, and I actually want you guys to look at this whole presentation with a specific lens. I want you to notice what I'm mentioning about myself, what I'm saying about my journey, and how I'm saying it, and how I then tie it to the rest of the presentation and the topic about you finding a job in pharma. And I'm going to ask you to come back to this at the end. So I want you to be intentional kind of about paying attention to those key factors. All right, so back to this. Who am I? So like Taylor mentioned, I am a PharmD. I graduated from MCPHS University in Boston just last year, May 2020, during the pandemic. And thereafter, I actually have started my part-time MBA in healthcare management at SNPhA as well. That is a part-time online program, so it's just a couple of credits a semester over a few years. I also currently, during the day or my normal day job, I work as a senior regulatory writer at a company called Aura. And of course, like Taylor mentioned, I have the brand FocusRx, where I'm really striving to basically have any helpful resources for a career, with it, whether it's for pharmacy or any other realm, and your lifestyle in general. So if you guys are interested, definitely check that out. All right, so now I kind of want to go into my education and career path and walk you through what my experiences were during pharmacy school. Why I want to actually highlight this is so that you can kind of see how I formed my story. Again, I'll ask you to be very intentional about thinking about this. I'm trying to point it out. So let's move to the beginning of my pharmacy school years. Before pharmacy school, I wasn't always gung-ho about pharmacy school, but I knew I liked medicine. My senior year of high school, I was fortunate enough to do an internship at my local hospital. And I got to see the birth center, operating center, ER, ICU. And it was a great experience, but I was just observing. That was enough to pique my interest, but that's where I actually met a pharmacist who was like, I love my job. And that's how basically I came into pharmacy. So like every other pharmacy student, I started as a pharmacy technician at CVS my freshman year. And within a few months, I kind of didn't really see myself long-term in that position. And maybe I don't know if I did, but I just didn't have any other experience to really compare it to, right? So my goal after that was just to find, any role within the scientific realm to basically gain as much experience as I could. I knew that research was kind of a hot word. It was kind of a hot topic. So I really looked into research, kind of just lab bench science research. I reached out to a bunch of different labs in Boston. Thankfully, there's a bunch of hospitals. So naturally, there's a bunch of labs. So I literally emailed like 200 or 300 of them, reached out, got a few responses, met some people, volunteered at first, and then that eventually turned into a job. That is not a normal pathway for a pharmacist, but I want to point that out because it was something different that I did. And my only goal was to honestly just to gain experience. It was so early on. I didn't know what I was doing or what I wanted to do. I just wanted a job and wanted it to be helpful towards, the big picture. After that, I had my first internship within the pharmaceutical industry at a company called Celgene, which is now bought by BMS, and that was in the Global Medical Affairs Strategic Planning Group. I wanted to see what industry was about. I never, had heard of it until that point. I saw that pharmacists could go into it. I wanted to experience it. After I did, I knew that was, what I wanted to do, and I've never looked back since. So I had the opportunity after that to have 2 APPEs in the industry as well. One at Vertex Pharmaceuticals and one at BGB Group, which is a CRO. And those were, of course, great experiences, just too short. 5 or 6 weeks for an APPE is just way too short. So those are all the experiences that I would like to highlight that I got during my pharmacy school years. Now, that's not to say that that's everything I did. There's a lot more that I did, but this is what I'm highlighting. Again, notice that I'm pointing that out. So now that brings me to after graduation, I now work as a regulatory writer. So let's now dive into what I do during my day job as a regulatory writer. So let's focus on the left side of the screen first. I want to first explain what type of company I work for within the pharmaceutical industry. Again, when people think of the pharmaceutical industry, just a pharma company or a biotech company kind of comes to mind. And that is largely a huge part of it. But there are other companies and other roles within the pharmaceutical industry as well that a lot of people don't think about all the time. So one of those things is a CRO, or a contract research organization. So that is where I work. My company is a CRO, and generally CROs are responsible for actually running the clinical trials of a pharmaceutical company. Now, CROs can also be for other purposes. It's basically like every department within a pharmaceutical company can basically just outsource work to another agency that now specializes in that work, right? So if you are the medical affairs team, and your company doesn't have a stats team, but you really need, good statisticians for XYZ thing, you would hire an external stats agency to do that. So that would be a CRO that you would hire. So that is an example of a CRO, and that is the type of company that I work at. So within the CRO that I am at, I sit within regulatory affairs. So let's talk about what regulatory affairs is responsible for. They are responsible for the communication between that company, or in this case, our clients, because our clients are pharma companies. And we are responsible for the communication between that company and the FDA or any other regulatory agency, so the EMA in Europe, etc. You are really responsible for obtaining and maintaining the approval for all new pharmaceutical products. So this is true, but also there's more to that. You're not only responsible for the approvals, but like it says, the maintenance of that. And the maintenance can also be before approval within the drug development process. So basically, you're just responsible for any communication that happens between the company that is making XYZ drug with the governmental agency. In this case, in the US, is the FDA. So now within regulatory affairs, under that umbrella, you have medical writing. Now, why I say is because medical writing in and of itself can actually sit in any team, honestly. There's always clinical writing, there's always regulatory writing, and you're always going to have different components. So it can actually sit within many different functional areas. In our company, it happens to be, again, in regulatory. So regulatory writing is really a subset of medical writing, which really right now is identified as the key skill in the pharmaceutical industry. It really is the basis of understanding how to analyze data, how to do all the kind of foundational science work and understanding that. So it really is key to gain that skill. And even within medical writing, there's not just one type. There are so many different types, and you can be an expert in one, you can be an expert in more than one. So there are many different avenues to basically work in. So like I kind of alluded to, regulatory writing is then a subset of medical writing, where you're specifically working on the documents that are going to be governmental agencies. So my role is actually a hybrid between a regulatory writer and a medical writer, even though that's kind of a subset. So I work on both clinical type documents and regulatory type documents. So as you guys can see, that role can kind of be fluid. It really depends on the company and the role. But generally, that is a differentiation. So now I want to step back and talk about what I did and on a timeline, what my job search process was like. So let's go back to August of my 6th year of pharmacy school. That was in 2019, and that is actually when I started job searching. Not with the intent of necessarily landing a job within the first 2 or 3 or 4 months that I was looking. I knew it was extremely early. It was August, like basically a year before I could actually commit to working, right? So that's a huge commitment, and pretty much nobody would ever hire for that much in advance. So I knew that, but I kind of wanted to prep, start interviewing, getting that practice in, start seeing what the industry was like, start, getting comfortable with just talking to people, getting the lingo down, things like that. I just wanted to start early. So I actually did start searching then. And I did have many interviews with people, and it would always end in, oh, you're not available now. Okay, check back in with me in March or April before you're graduating. So the conversation always ended there. But again, it was like a really good thing to get ahead of the game and kind of get that practice. So I did that between August and about September, October. And October is when the mid-year process really begins. All the application portals open, all of that happens. So that's what I started doing in October. At the time, I was, in November, I had joined my Vertex API internship. And so during that time, I was actually doing a lot of my mid-year interviews. So that time was overlapped. I was, immersed in industry. I was doing my API at Vertex, and I was mid-year prepping. And so it was all kind of conducive to one another. Then, of course, December rolled around and mid-year was in Vegas that year. I vlogged it. So if you guys have seen my channel, I actually vlogged my whole mid-year experience. I had an absolute blast. And so that happened in December. Coming out of mid-year, in about mid-January, I actually did get a fellowship offer that I did not end up taking. So once I ended up not taking that, I was back to job searching again for an entry-level position to join upon graduation. So between January and actually up until June, I was job searching. I entertained, as many interviews as possible. I applied as much as possible. And June was when I received an offer that I was ready to accept. And so I accepted it, and that's where I currently work. So overall, as you guys can see, the timeline is extremely long. And what I want to make super evident here is the time between January and June. I never had an idea of when I would land a job. You don't know. That's just how mid-year is timed. That's how all of this happens. And so that was a risk that I took. And so you have to be patient. And I think that that's, again, a message I want to get across. So hopefully that was the point that I made here. So now that I've talked about me, getting a fellowship, not taking it, me now being in an entry-level job, let's talk about that. So let's talk about the pros and cons of, going the fellowship route within the pharmaceutical industry versus going the entry-level route. Now, this is a question that I get asked a lot. When I was an intern, I used to ask this question to every single person, whether they were a PharmD or not, because they, probably have interacted with a PharmD that was a fellow and then interacted with a PharmD that was not a fellow. So everyone has an opinion about this and can kind of see the pros and cons. So I would always ask this question. And that's where I've kind of gathered these pros and cons from. So let's talk about fellowships first. The whole goal of a fellowship, of course, is to grow you into the professional within the pharmaceutical industry that everyone strives to be, correct? It is supposed to bolster your learning. It's supposed to provide you opportunities. So a huge pro of a fellowship is that it is a 1 to 2 dedicated years that's giving you high impact training. And that's going to amount to a lot more experience than just 1 to 2 years. If you're actually in the face of actually super high profile projects for the amount of 1 or 2 years, that can amount to a lot of experience. So that is an open platter opportunity if you are in that space. And if you get a fellowship, again, you are in a very prime opportunity to be taught and to learn the foundations in the correct way. So you're setting yourself up for success when you sign up for a fellowship. Now, the next pro for a fellowship is that you have guaranteed mentorship. Again, that's the whole point of the program. The whole point is for you to be able to learn all these different nuances of this role within the industry to then succeed later. So again, you're there to be trained. You're, of course, there to do work too, but the training is a huge part of it. And so that's guaranteed, and that's going to help propel you in your career so much. I can't express how important mentorship is. So that really is valuable. The next pro for a fellowship is the exposure to those high profile projects. You're not always in the face of that. Let's just say if you are in an entry level job, you might not be able to be put on the most high profile projects. As a fellow, again, you're there for that experience. So most companies, most managers do try to get their fellows, onto the bigger projects, onto the hot topics that are happening within the company so that they can kind of progress and learn as fast as they can. So again, that's just part of the program, and it is a big pro. You're setting yourself up for success by just naturally putting yourself in that environment, which is, of course, my next point here. So I have honed that enough. And the next thing is just, it might assist in obtaining a promotion faster. This is a topic that a lot of people talk about. Oh, after 2 years, you'll come out a manager or something like that. And people talk about it like that. It might, but it also could not. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's about how much you put into whichever role you're in, whether it's a fellowship or an entry-level position. If you're not going to stay competitive and keep pushing for it, even in a fellowship, it's not going to happen. Even after a fellowship, you have to job search. A job is not guaranteed. So you have to keep all these things in mind. It could assist you if you, again, are put in the right place. You you have the perfect opportunities, you strive after, the biggest opportunities, and all of those things. And a lot of those factors are variable. So you definitely have to think about those. Now let's move to the entry level side. So there are definitely some pros on the entry level side. The first is probably the most obvious, and it is the pay. Fellowships like residencies, have an average of 50,000 per year, and that's just how residency and fellowship programs are. So to expect that. So naturally, an entry level job is just going to be higher than that, and that's just how it's going to be. But again, you have to understand you have to weigh your own benefits and risks, right? You are almost paying for the training that you're receiving in the fellowship in hopes that it will really propel you faster, right? So you have to weigh what those benefits are, and it honestly will depend on what program, what role we're comparing and talking about. But again, on average, the pay will be higher, just as a blanket statement. When you're in an entry level position, you have to know that you're an employee. And so again, you're not there for a training program. The first purpose of you being there is not to teach you, it is to get a job done. So you have to understand that any teaching you want to do, any learning you want to do, any extra, attention you want from a growth and learning perspective has to be kind of on top of your job role. Now, I am okay with that, and many people are, because we're all go-getters. But if you are by chance not okay with that, if that is something you cannot invest in, again, that's something good to know. With entry-level positions, you might initially feel like you actually have more ownership over things versus a fellowship. Again, with the fellowship, you're there for a training program, but this is extremely dependent on the program and the company, because it really depends on how, a company views a fellow. But it can depend. Initially, if there are no other people doing the work, and you're an employee, you might be, responsible for a lot more than a fellow might be. So that might be a good thing. That might also not be a good thing, because then you don't have time to actually learn and absorb what you're doing. So it can kind of go both ways. The one thing about entry level is that, of course, both, networking really matters, and that's what's going to be the factor that's going to decide, how many doors are open for you after this. But in general, I feel like if you are able to get yourself in the door entry level, that does automatically open doors, because you're naturally working with people, you're at the same level, so you're seen at that level. And so you become, I feel like, just colleagues a lot faster. Again, this is a very biased opinion of mine from my own experience, from what I've seen. But again, you're in that job role, you're not seen as a student anymore, you're not seen in a training program anymore. And sometimes I think that can affect things. But the thing I really want to talk about here is the outcome. Like I mentioned, I think at the end of the day, it's all about how much effort you put in. If I am now in an entry-level position and I don't put in any time to actually network with people, that's not automatically going to come to me. And same thing in a fellowship. Just because I'm in a fellowship doesn't mean, networking is going to come easy all of a sudden, or I'm going to get all of these opportunities coming my way. That's not really how it works. So you have to really put in that time and effort either way you go. And so ideally, I think that generally they can honestly have the same impact. People say after a 2-year fellowship, you can get hired into a manager position. After 2 years of work experience, I think that you would be able to as well. So it really just depends on how much you make of any opportunity that is given to you. So now let's talk about how to leverage our PharmDs within the pharmaceutical industry. You've decided you want to be in the pharma industry, great. Maybe you've gone through the fellowship program, maybe you've gotten a fellowship, or maybe you haven't. Regardless of which step you're at, it's really important to know how to leverage your PharmD when you're not only talking about it, but in conversation, in interviews, even in your just daily repertoire of yourself. Like, this is just how you should view, the value of a PharmD within the industry. And you do have to convince people of this. PharmDs are becoming more and more known within the pharmaceutical industry, and many companies do accept it now. But that was something that recently changed. And so there are many companies that still don't have that. So you might be going places that you have to show people what a PharmD knows, what we are trained for. So again, it's important to know these factors. As you guys know, kind of the biggest value point of a pharmacist is definitely that we have that clinical background, therapeutic knowledge, and then clinical, actually hands-on expertise. That really is important when it comes to understanding, the value of something to a patient quick care, quality of life, and then obviously helps on the actual science side of things when you're talking about molecules, when you're actually doing the work and understanding the science from a therapeutics, from a med chem point of view. We understand these drugs and the mechanisms of action. So it's extremely easy for us to then assimilate into these roles where we have to write about the mechanism of action or make a presentation about the mechanism of action, or show the important parts of this mechanism of action. Again, we are trained to think about things like that in a scientific way. We have that background knowledge. So it's all about how you transform that into your story. So it really helps us, again, with the hands-on clinical expertise we get, whether it's through your side jobs or whether it's through your APPEs, that general knowledge that we do have of pharmacokinetics, pharmacology, drug interactions, side effects, overall patient treatment, etc. We know how to communicate both with a patient on a patient level with words that a patient understands, and we know how to talk to physicians and doctors and prescribers, and we know how to what to say to whom. And that's an extremely important skill within the pharmaceutical industry. If you can understand who your audience is, what you need to say to them, and what will make an impact for them, you are valuable. So if we innately as PharmDs come with that skill, we are valuable. The next thing is we are taught about so many different disease states and scientific treatments and the latest science treatments. So we have that diverse knowledge. Now, of course, it's not deep down. You can't come out of pharmacy school saying you are an expert in cardiology. You physically cannot be, but that gives us a diverse enough knowledge to kind of dive into anything science related, drug related, and start to understand it. So that digestibility is a huge skill. Now let's talk about roles within pharmacy and specifically talk about the non-traditional ones. I want to highlight that I think pharmacy right now is actually in a very transformative time. We have seen, pharmacy used to just be brick and mortar pharmacies. It's just your retail, your community pharmacies. And that was the basic foundation of it. And that was the need of the time. But as time has gone on, as we have, our tech industries changing our world, as things are becoming automated, there is not only more of a need for a pharmacist in different industries, but the whole industry in and of itself, in terms of the job market, in terms of the focus, is really changing. And so that's where these non-traditional roles come into play. There's a lot you can do with a PharmD right now. And this is not a comprehensive list at all. I probably have missed so many here. But there's a lot you can do with a PharmD. And I think people are starting to, again, make the transformation from pharmacy just being that brick and mortar pharmacy to really making it a holistic degree like an MD, where you have background knowledge and you can apply it any way you can. Any way that you want. If you are an MD, you can open your own clinic. You can work at a hospital. You can work at somebody else's clinic. You could see patients and just work part-time, right? You can do telemedicine now. You can do so many different things. You could go be a medical writer. You could be a medical director. You can work in pharma. You can work in a clinical setting. You could work at the FDA. So in that same way, PharmDs are now being utilized because, again, our background knowledge and our schooling gives us a really strong foundation. So it's really awesome. I think that this transition is happening. I think we have to recognize that this transition is happening and teach in our schools and to students that these exist. So hopefully, if you guys haven't known about these other roles that are existent within pharmacy, hopefully this is an introduction for you. Definitely look into it. I think there's a role out there for everyone. There is literally so much you can do within pharmacy, and it's incredible. So one of those non-traditional roles, of course, is pharmacy is the pharmaceutical industry. So that is what I've chosen. But like I've mentioned, there's so many others. You can work for governmental agencies like the FDA or the EMA. You can work in managed care. You can work, of course, as a clinical pharmacist, but you can also be a specialty clinical pharmacist. And I think going into a specialty is, again, very much so overlooked. Pharmacoeconomics, pharmacogenomics, these are all things that careers are being formed off of. And if you don't know of it, I think you should at least make yourself aware. So hopefully this was just a step into that. But I think that, we are changing again the landscape of pharmacy from brick and mortar community only to all these other things. So definitely look at these openings and opportunities as you're looking to join the workforce. So now I just want to keep track of time. So now I want to talk about how to stand out. We all want to know that. We all want to know how to stand out in an interview, how to make our application stand out, all of those things. And I feel like when I say this, the type of answers you guys are looking for are on the far right. And that's why they are there. They're small and they're on the right because they are true, but that's not what I want to focus on. I want to focus on kind of the non-technical aspects of things that are really going to make you stand out. By the time you're doing interviews, whether it's for an entry-level position or a fellowship, most of your peers, most of the other applicants are going to be of a similar background. You know that everyone applying for a fellowship has a PharmD. You know that we are all at the equal level of that. So what is going to make you stand out? It can't be your education. It physically can't be unless you somehow got, again, a dual degree or you did your bachelor's beforehand. But for the most part, we all have done kind of equal amounts of schooling. So you have to figure out ways to really stand out outside of your education. And that's where these kind of non-tangible things come into play. So the first one I want to focus on is to truly be yourself. I know that sounds cliche, and it's supposed to be, I guess. I want to point out that you hear this all the time, but I promise you, you probably don't actually act on it, and you probably have not taken this advice. And I really want you to pause and think about, truly being yourself and what that means in an interview, when talking to someone about a potential position and in any professional setting. What does it actually mean to truly be yourself? I think once you understand that, you'll understand that it makes a huge difference in how you interview. You have to realize, like everyone says, that you are also interviewing the company. You have to realize you're spending and you're going to be spending a lot of time, effort, energy, money, thought into this job that you're going to go into. So as much as you are trying to find a position and as much as the company wants it to be the right fit, you really have to know if it's the right fit for you. And the only way is to, again, truly be yourself. I want to point out an example. When I was at mid-year, I actually applied for a lot of different fellowships and I got a good amount of interviews, and some interviews happen, the first round is at mid-year. So there was one interview and I didn't know much about it. And usually the first interview, the interviewer lists out kind of what the fellowship is about. So that's how our conversation started. And as this nice lady was telling me about this position, I was listening to it and I was like, this is not really what I imagined walking in. This doesn't really align with what I want to do. And if you guys have seen mid-year or been to mid-year, it's craziness. It's just 30-minute slots back to back. I had been back to back with interviews and I'm sure she had too. I was in no mood to kind of waste my time or her time. And so once she was done telling me about about the overview of the position, I nicely let her know that this is a position that, was different than what I thought I had applied to. I don't necessarily see myself in this position, and I didn't want to, again, waste her time or my time. And so I let her know that, and I wished her luck in the rest of the process. She wished me luck, and that's it. But 7 minutes into the interview, I left. I just knew that wasn't the position for me. And I know for a fact that many people wouldn't do something like that. And that's what I want to point out. I knew that wasn't for me. I knew that I wouldn't be happy doing that. I only knew that because, again, I was being myself and I was okay with saying that to her. Now it could have gone either way. I could have, waited out the interview and not shown interest after that. But either way, just truly know and assess, whether a role is actually also right for you. And I think by the way that you'll assess that, you'll naturally stand out to the interviewer. The next thing that's really going to help you stand out in fellowship interviews and in also entry level job interviews is making sure that your technical aptitude is really apparent. And I guess before that, make sure that your technical aptitude is, up to par. Know the science, know what that company is working on, know how their drugs work, know why it's a big deal, know that whole story, and know it on the technical side of things. Because you want to be able to point to that in your interview, and you want to be able to show them that within this little amount of time, you know this much about what they do, and it's something that they should have, and they should be an expert on. So they'll know what you're talking about, and that'll again kind of make you stand out if you can just mention those things in your interview and let them come up naturally. But make it apparent when you do. Make it a point to say, like, look, I know my science. I know what you work in. I know this. And whether that happens through talking about that company's medication, or, if you're talking about a past presentation because you get asked a question about it and you can bring up the science and that, somehow just show them you are scientifically sound. Show them that you are actually educated as a PharmD. And the last tip that I have in terms of how to stand out in an interview for job positions in general is always think of, what's happening on the other side. And I think that's more so that you guys don't get caught up within the whole job process. It can be really strenuous. It can take a long time. Like I said, January to June, I had no idea what I was doing. So it can take a long time, and you have to be patient, and you're gonna get tired of it. And you might get to a point where you're like, why am I not getting a position? Why is this happening? And get yourself into a really negative space. You have to understand the other side of it. You have to see it from their perspective. Maybe there are, candidates that just are better than you because they are more experienced. So many times people do take a role in a different industry if they're more experienced, or if they just want to cut back. And you can never really, control that. You don't have control if someone with 15 years of experience comes and applies to the same position that you were applying to. So that's out of your control. Many times companies put out a position and then it gets on hold. I've interviewed for many positions where, if the role were to go forward, I would have probably gotten the job, but they actually put it on hold and it never goes forward. And no one ever gets the position. So there's a lot of things that happen kind of behind the scenes. A role is there because there's a need there, and sometimes there's not someone to support that role, or there could be literally endless reasons. So know that it's not always you, and let it just slide off and keep applying, just keep being persistent about it. So those are all things that are really, again, going to help you stand out. Actually be yourself, and again, take time to think about what that looks like. Actually be yourself. Make sure you show them that you know your stuff, and don't get too bogged down with the process. It's all a process, and you're just merely a piece of it. And when the piece needs to fit, it will. I promise you, it will. Now, technically, yes, in terms of how to stand out, you can always work on certifications, networking, engaging in conversations and posts and all of that on LinkedIn. Networking events, courses, additional degrees, all of those, again, technical aspects. But I think more than that, these non-technical aspects are really important. So now let's move on to where to look for jobs. If you guys are starting to look for entry-level positions and don't know where to look, it's not that hard, I promise. I honestly look for most of my jobs on LinkedIn. More and more companies solely use LinkedIn as their kind of marketing platform for their jobs. So what most companies do is they have the role on their website, and then they, send it out to people to basically post on their job boards. And more companies are solely exclusively doing that with LinkedIn. So it's a great resource. That's how I landed the job that I am currently in, through LinkedIn. I talk to HR through LinkedIn, everything. So again, that's a huge resource that I would say if you guys haven't used, then definitely use. You can set on your profile if you want to be seen as looking for a job by recruiters. You can set what those jobs are, what your interests are. You can set up job alerts. So I did all of that. The next place to look for jobs is asking within your network, of course. Now, don't don't do that in a begging kind of manner. There's a professional way to, of course, go about this, but when it comes to asking your network, you have to realize that it's always based on a need. So instead of maybe asking if a role has opened up, really try to understand what the company's needs are. What person is moving where, what is working on a team, what's not working on a team, things like that. Then you can kind of see where the gaps are, understand where people kind of move. And as people move, again, because you're aware of that, people might be able to tell you, oh, look, that person moved, that role just opened up. That's kind of one way to go about in terms of conversation, asking within your network for a job. Of course, pharmaceutical company websites, many companies solely post jobs on their websites and nowhere else. So that is something that you just have to do. You have to go to every pharmaceutical company that you're interested in, look at their careers and see what they have available. Google Jobs, again, you can set Google job alerts. That's the second thing I did. I did LinkedIn and Google. Those two was all I needed. And then IPHO actually has a great job board as well for industry entry-level positions and fellowships. So even after mid-year, actually, many fellowships do recruit through January through February, and all those applications are usually seen on the IPHO job board as well. So if you guys have access to that, that's a great resource. So I've been talking at you guys for a long time, but I want to end it with some job search tips. So if you guys are, job searching right now, or you plan to at some point, or have gone through the process, I just want to highlight some tips here. Again, a lot of these I have talked about, but these are some specifics that I really want to point out. So the first is quantity. Apply to as many jobs as you can. Quantity automatically equals more opportunity. This obviously just makes sense. The more you open yourself up to, that just automatically leads to a possible opportunity. And it's better than not ever opening those doors up for yourself, right? So that's really, really important. Like I mentioned, when I was looking for my research job, I reached out to, I believe, 214 labs. So I sent 214 emails. I only got 10 responses out of 214. That's less than 5% response rate. And out of those 10 responses, 8 of those were complete no's, like, sorry, no, we don't have funding. Sorry, no, there's no one to train you, all those things. And then 2 people were like, maybe like come in and we'll talk. And that's all it took. But it took 214 emails. So that's what I mean by quantity. When I applied to fellowships, I did not have a number. And at the end of it, I ended up having 26 interviews the 3 days at mid-year. And I had many before then as well. I had so many, but that wouldn't have happened if I, again, didn't apply to as many fellowships. Now, don't go overboard. Do what you can handle. But again, the more you apply to, the more opportunity you're opening yourself up to. The next tip I have is actually when you sit down to work on your resume or your CV for job searching, really go through an exercise where you strenuously look at each item on your resume. And if you can't say why that's there and why that's important, remove it. I think that people don't do this often enough. You have to basically make your resume the perfect story. Now, if you are limited on experiences, all of that, I understand that. But you have to be very nitpicky on how you, again, show your story throughout your resume. So if that requires removing the fluff so that the other things shine, do that. And again, I don't think many people do this. I think it's a really helpful tip, and it honestly really helped just clear up my resume. There's so much that's not on my resume that I have done. But again, I kind of have just made it so that the story is extremely clear. I am applying to this position because of this, and this is why this story makes sense. So make it clear for them, draw the lines for them by, again, removing things from your resume. The next tip is, again, as you're job searching, as you're interviewing, know the science. So for every interview, you should, again, even if you don't get asked about it, just know the mechanism of action of the drug that they, have, where in the pipeline they are, whether they're a big company, small company, how many drugs they have in the pipeline, how many approvals they have, all of those details, and the science for their science. Most companies, again, are pooled into certain therapeutic areas. So knowing at least the gist of their science and why they are important is extremely, extremely important. Interviews, the next tip, don't over rehearse for interviews. I think the one thing that I saw in mid-year that I wish students could see more is A, how nervous everyone is while prepping, but B, how rehearsed everyone sounds. At mid-year, you don't have thick walls. It's just a curtain between all the different pods of interviews happening. And so you can listen in on a lot of the interviews. And now that I've actually been on the side where I've been interviewing people, I can see as well. It is extremely obvious when you over rehearse. And the second someone gets an inkling that you are over rehearsed and you are really, really nervous, it's really hard for that thought to, go away. It's really hard for them to focus then on the content of what you're talking about in your answers. So just don't give them that chance. Don't over rehearse. Be confident in what you have to say. Don't, rehearse line by line. Actually just go in and have a conversation. Don't think of it of like answer, you get a question asked, you have to give an answer, question, answer, question, answer. That doesn't have to be how it is. You can go in and you can start the interview. You don't have to wait for the other person to, ask you how you are. Things like that, just make it a normal interaction, make it a normal conversation. And then, of course, skillfully add all the little pieces that should go into an interview. But again, don't over rehearse because you're going to forget it's an actual conversation. And then it's not going to come across genuinely. And then, what happens after that. So that's that. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is I want you to be able to tell your story. And this is the biggest lesson that I have really learned within this whole job searching process. Everyone tells you that, you learn a lot about yourself at mid-year. And that's because you're trying to formulate your whole schooling, your experiences, everything you've done so far into some kind of a story that makes sense as to why you want XYZ fellowship or job position. And you really have to know about all the different pieces within that to then talk about it. So now I want to pause and step away from this whole presentation. And I want to go back to what I asked you guys to do at the beginning. And that was to be intentionally looking for how I am presenting this information. I led you through my story, what I do, how, what I did in pharmacy school, where I am now, what I do, and then how all of that is important within the pharmaceutical industry. And then we dove into job search tips, right? But I made all that flow and connect to my story. So what I mean by you being able to tell your story is I need you to be doing exactly that in an interview. You have to meet your interviewer where they are, which is they don't know anything about you. You have to convince them that this is exactly what they're looking for. And you have to talk at their language. So I talked to you guys about job search tips, about, these thoughts and these questions that you have. Again, I met you where you are. I infused my story into it to really drive home the importance of everything that I was talking about. So that's exactly what you need to do in an interview. In an interview, the content is set. You are going to be asked questions about X, Y, Z. You know that. So it's your job to then infuse yourself and your story into those questions and into your responses to then make that whole thing work. I would hope that by the end of this presentation now, you know kind of why this all fits in together, why I'm interested in even talking about this stuff, and I guess even why I'm able to talk about this stuff, right? I've done X, Y, Z to be able to talk about this stuff. So I gave you that much of my story in this. So you have to kind of reflect on your own story and be able to tie kind of everything again to things you've done, to things that you've been a part of, and to parts of your experience. So I hope that that kind of showed you guys, and really drove home the point that I was, trying to make about really being yourself. So that's what I mean by the title, trying to find your voice. It really is about that. And once you find that, you won't give yourself, the space to be in a position where you don't like the role or the job, and you'll be very happy where you are. But it does require kind of that thinking and that understanding of yourself. So I have talked enough and a lot at you guys. So I want to go ahead and stop there. I hope this presentation was helpful. I hope that all of this information is helpful. If you guys are interested in learning kind of more in depth about kind of all the things that I talked about, and again, we touched a lot of topics at a high level. On my channel, I do a lot of different videos about a lot of different topics, and I've gone deeper into a lot of these different topics. So this isn't like a self plug. You guys don't have to subscribe or watch anything else. But if you find the video that's helpful on a topic that we talked about today, then that is a resource for you guys to go watch. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys have questions, I don't know if Taylor, you want to come back, or how we want to facilitate this, but I would be happy to answer you guys' questions. And hopefully we have some time to do that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. I think that was just a wonderful presentation. You gave so many helpful tips and tricks, and honestly, about being yourself is so important in terms of going into not only the job world, but just going into the adult world itself. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that. Does anyone on the call have any particular questions for Dr. Gupta in regards to kind of her journey or her role as a regulatory writer, or just any of the things that she talked about in terms of job searching or anything of that nature?
Hi, Dr. Gupta. I actually have a question for you.
Sure. I can't see you, by the way, so if I'm not looking straight at you, that's why, but go ahead.
It's okay. So I'm actually just learning about industry and pharma, and I go into like different websites and I look at like the fellowships, the programs, and they normally have candidates and it has their credentials. I noticed like a lot of people have MPHs and a lot of people have MBAs. I noticed you have an MBA. Do you find that an MBA is more beneficial, or are they one and the same in the industry pharmacy? How do you decide between an MBA and an MPH?
Yeah. Well, let me answer the question that you didn't ask, and answer the question of, is it even necessary? So let's start there. I don't think it's necessary to have a dual degree. To be very frank, I was just presented with the opportunity of being able to do it. And so that is why I took that opportunity to do it. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary. And going forward, I don't know how much it's going to help me in my career to have that MBA. Why I say that is because an MBA is, of course, really helpful to understand the business aspect of things, which is a huge part of the pharmaceutical industry. But in the roles that you're going to be in, you're going to learn the business side of things in a way that you might not learn in an MBA. And what's really key is infusing the science. So our PharmD really does kind of act as kind of the only thing that we need for that. So I would begin to say, MPH, MBA, any dual degree, I don't think it's necessary. Where I do think it's a good idea is if you have a reason for it. So if you are extremely interested in regulatory affairs, and you have the opportunity to do a regulatory affairs master's, and if it makes sense for you, then again, that is something that makes sense in the trajectory of things. If you want to work in public health, but you want to be in the pharma space with that, having an MPH could really help that. So again, we're back to your story. If it makes sense in your story, then do it. For me, it made sense because I was presented with the opportunity, and I am just naturally interested in the business aspect of things. So whether or not it helped at work, I would hope that I would at least learn some things. So that was how it kind of fit into my story. Between the two, again, it would really depend on your overall goals. They're two very different degrees. On the MBA side of things, again, you're learning more of the economics, the business, the money behind it. Public health is, of course, public health, and so it really depends on your kind of interests and what that ideal role is for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any
And
other?
I believe we have another question in the chat, if you're able to see that, or I can read that to you.
Could you read it to me?
Yes. So we have a question from Miss Khan, and she said, did you ever explore any other industry-related positions during your pharmacy school outside of your regulatory writing internships?
Yes. So actually, I wanted to clarify that my internships were actually not in regulatory affairs. So up until I graduated, I was actually targeting medical affairs and clinical development. Those are the two functional areas that I applied for fellowships in. So my internship at Celgene was in medical affairs. And my other two experiences, again, were also on the medical communications, medical affairs side of things. I just happened to drop into regulatory with this role. It was not a planned transition. And so I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but I did explore medical affairs. I explored clinical development. I think that that's a space that PharmDs can really make an impact in, and not many PharmDs are there. We're kind of slowly transitioning, but I found it really interesting, and I got to spend some time within clinical at Celgene as well. And then now regulatory affairs. So technically I've entertained 3 functional areas, and all 3 are great. So I don't know if that answered your question, since it wasn't kind of the premise of the question, but hopefully that added some insight.
Thank you. And did anyone else have any other questions?
I did. Hi, Dr. Gupta. I apologize if I missed this, but regarding internships, how did you really leverage your time there just to make sure you were making the most out of your internship opportunities?
Yeah, great question. I literally did everything that I could. And the most that you can do for yourself is honestly the networking part. So my manager was great that he was like, you have your internship assignments and you will have the work, but your main goal is to meet with people. And so, I would have 3 or 4 one-on-ones a day. I would just meet a random person for 30 minutes, and it was in, literally various departments, from project management to project leadership to clinical operations, clinical development, regulatory. Like I was just meeting with anyone and everyone, PharmDs and not PharmDs. One, I was trying to understand, how everything works together. And 2, I was trying to gauge, what I would maybe be most interested in. And especially my first internship, the summer internship at Celgene, I really wanted to walk away from that internship knowing what I at least wanted to target. So that's exactly what I did. I spent, time in medical affairs, and then I asked for time in clinical development. I got about a month in clinical development, and I walked out, and that's exactly what I applied to for my fellowships a year and a half later. So that was my goal, and that's how I kind of leveraged it. Just talk to as many people as you can, and keep in touch with them. It's really ironic you said that. I actually just talked to my manager from that internship today. So I think the biggest takeaway from that is just, really keep in touch with the people that you talk to at these internships and leverage your time there. You have the email address of the company, and you have free reign to email anyone in the company and say, hey, can we meet for 30 minutes? So really take that opportunity up.
She stated in the chat it was very helpful, and
Any other questions? Hello?
yes, did anyone have any other questions? And also, you guys, this is also a networking opportunity, just like she talked about with talking with a lot of her superiors in her internship one-on-one. This is also your opportunity to kind of connect and network with her and other students on the call in this particular arena.
Yep, exactly right.
Hi, Dr. Gupta. I'm actually really interested in clinical development, medical affairs. Um, Maybe I can connect with you after this event, but if you had anyone in mind that you think would be an excellent resource for like navigating that area further, I would extremely appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, definitely reach out to me. My LinkedIn messages sometimes get lost because there's a lot of them. But if you can just directly email me on my FocusRx email, it's focusrxpharma@gmail.com. I will definitely answer through that. So just reach out and we can kind of take it from there.
You said it was focusrxpharma@gmail.com?
Yep, correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. This has been great. Thank you guys so much for being so involved. And you guys clearly listened to the whole presentation. So I really appreciate it.
And that was the presentation. I hope you guys, of course, learned from this presentation. And if you guys have any other follow-up questions, as always, feel free to reach out via email. Leave the questions down in the comment section below, anywhere, wherever is easiest for you guys. I will get back to you. I really do try to get back to you, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions that came from this presentation, so feel free to ask me. I'll definitely go more in depth on the topics that I talked about in this presentation, since it was just a quick presentation and I couldn't really deep dive into all the different aspects that I wanted to talk about, but I did want to let you guys know that I will be kind of expanding on each topic here on the channel. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you guys learned something, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Thank you again to SNPhA for having me. That is it for today's video, and as always, you guys will see me in the next one.